Imagine this. It's a lazy Sunday evening in August 1971. Families across America are glued to their TVs, watching the popular show Bonanza, when suddenly, the screen cuts to President Richard Nixon, looking stern and determined. He announces a bombshell that would forever alter the fabric of global finance. The United States is slamming shut the gold window, ending the convertibility of dollars into gold. This wasn't just a policy tweak, it was the death knell for the Bretton Woods system, a post-World War II agreement that had kept the world's economies stable for nearly 3 decades. Why does this matter to you today? Because this single decision paved the way for the fiat money we use now, where governments can print cash endlessly, leading to inflation spikes, massive national debts, and even the rise of cryptocurrencies as a rebellion against it. Let's dive into the chaos that led to this moment. Back in the day, money wasn't just paper, it was backed by real, shiny gold. Under the gold standard, countries promised to exchange their currency for a fixed amount of gold, ensuring stability and trust. But by the late 1960s, the US was in hot water. Vietnam War costs were skyrocketing, inflation was raging at over 5%, and foreign nations were cashing in their dollars for American gold reserves, draining Fort Knox like a leaky faucet. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, even sent warships to New York Harbor in the 1960s to load up on gold, mocking the US as an exorbitant privilege holder. Nixon, facing re-election pressures in 1972, couldn't let the economy tank. Whispers of a gold run were everywhere. Britain had just demanded $3 billion in gold, and speculators were betting against the dollar. In a secret weekend retreat at Camp David, Nixon huddled with his economic wizards, Treasury Secretary John Connally, Fed Chair Arthur Burns, and future Fed Chair Paul Volcker. They plotted seclusion, no leaks, crafting a plan that would shock the world. Connally famously quipped, "It's our currency, but it's your problem," summing up America's bold stance. When Nixon went live that night, interrupting TV dinners nationwide, he framed it as a heroic move to protect American jobs and prosperity. But behind the scenes, it was a desperate bid to avoid humiliation. This Nixon shock included wage and price freezes to tame inflation, and a 10% surcharge on imports to force other countries to revalue their currencies. The stock market exploded the next day, rising nearly 4% as investors cheered the audacity. Yet, this was just the beginning, a wild ride that transformed money from a scarce resource into an infinite, printable commodity. As we peel back the layers, you'll see how this heist-like decision didn't just change economics, it reshaped power, wars, and your wallet. Building on that explosive announcement, let's travel back in time to understand the rock-solid foundation that Nixon shattered, the gold standard's glorious history. For centuries, gold wasn't just jewelry, it was the bedrock of money. Ancient civilizations like the Egyptians and Romans used gold coins, but the modern gold standard kicked off in 1821 when Britain pegged the pound to gold at a fixed rate, inspiring others to follow. By the late 19th century, most major powers were on it, creating an era of unprecedented global trade and stability. Picture this: no wild inflation because governments couldn't print money willy-nilly. Every bill had to be backed by gold reserves. This system survived booms and busts, even World War I, though many countries suspended it temporarily. But here's a juicy anecdote. During the California gold rush of 1849, the influx of gold caused mild inflation, but the standard kept things in check, turning prospectors into millionaires overnight. Fast forward to the interwar period. The Great Depression hit hard in 1929, and countries like Britain abandoned gold in 1931, devaluing currencies to boost exports in a beggar-thy-neighbor frenzy. Franklin D. Roosevelt, in 1933, confiscated Americans' gold at $20.67 per ounce, then revalued it to $35, effectively devaluing the dollar by 40% to stimulate the economy. A sneaky move that echoed Nixon's later shock. This history set the stage for Bretton Woods. As World War II raged, economists like John Maynard Keynes and Harry Dexter White dreamed up a new system at a 1944 conference in New Hampshire. 44 nations agreed. The US dollar would be the world's reserve currency, convertible to gold at $35 per ounce, while other currencies pegged to the dollar. It was genius. America, flush with gold from war profits, held over 70% of global reserves. This ushered in the golden age capitalism. Low inflation booming, growth, and the Marshall Plan rebuilding Europe. But cracks appeared early. The Triffin dilemma, named after economist Robert Triffin, warned that the US had to run deficits to supply dollars for global liquidity, but those deficits eroded confidence in the dollar's gold backing. By the 1960s, US gold reserves plummeted from 20,000 tons to under 9,000, as Europe and Japan surged economically. Stories abound. Swiss bankers hoarding gold, German housewives trading of dollars on black markets. De Gaulle's France converted billions in dollars to gold, shipping it home in dramatic fashion, pressuring the US. This tension built like a pressure cooker, leading to Nixon's fateful weekend. As we move forward, you'll see how these historical threads wove into the 1960s crisis that forced America's hand. With the gold standard's storied past in mind, let's zoom into the birth of Bretton Woods, the system Nixon ultimately torpedoed, and why it seemed unbreakable at first. In July 1944, as Allied forces stormed Normandy, 730 delegates from 44 countries gathered at the luxurious Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, for a 3-week conference. Amid cigar smoke and intense debates, they forged a new monetary order to prevent the economic chaos that fueled the Great Depression and World War II. Key players, Britain's Keynes, advocating a global currency called Bancor, clashed with America's White, who pushed the dollar as king. The US won, establishing the dollar as convertible to gold, with the IMF and World Bank as watchdogs. Fun fact, Keynes, exhausted, collapsed during negotiations, highlighting the high stakes. This agreement created fixed exchange rates, the pound at $4.03, the franc at 1/5 cent, all adjustable only in crises. Post-war, it worked magic. Europe's reconstruction via $13 billion Marshall Plan dollars fueled growth, while Japan rose from ashes. By the 1950s, global trade tripled, inflation averaged 2%, and unemployment was low. The US enjoyed exorbitant privilege, printing dollars for imports without worry, as others held them as reserves. Anecdotes paint the picture. American tourists in Paris flashing dollars like royalty, while Europeans rebuilt with US aid. Yet, seeds of destruction were sown. As economies recovered, surpluses in Germany and Japan meant they accumulated dollars, questioning if America had enough gold. In 1960, gold prices spiked to $40 in London, prompting the gold pool, 8 nations intervening to cap it at $35. But it was a band-aid. De Gaulle, distrusting US fiscal laxity under Kennedy's New Frontier spending, began converting dollars to gold in 1965, famously calling the dollar "Tears of the World." By 1968, the pool collapsed amid Vietnam escalation costs, $30 billion annually, and Great Society programs ballooning deficits. Gold reserves halved, inflation hit 4%, and speculators bet on devaluation. Nixon inherited this mess in 1969, with advisors warning of impending doom. As pressures mounted, the system that promised eternal stability began to fracture, setting the scene for the turbulent 1960s events that pushed Nixon to act. This golden cage, once a savior, became a trap. As Bretton Woods' shine faded, The 1960s brought a storm of cracks that made the system's collapse inevitable. Building the pressure cooker, Nixon exploded. Picture America in the swinging 60s. Beatles mania, moon landings, but economically, trouble brewed. President Lyndon Johnson's guns and butter policy, funding Vietnam War bombs while expanding welfare, ignited inflation, rising from 1.3% in 1965 to 5.7% by 1969. The U.S. balance of payments deficit swelled to $3.5 billion as imports surged and gold flowed out. In 1967, Britain devalued the pound by 14%, sparking a gold rush. Private buyers stormed markets, forcing a 2-week closure of the London gold market. The U.S. airlifted gold to London to stabilize, but it was futile. Enter the Triffin dilemma in action. America needed deficits for world liquidity, but they undermined dollar confidence. Foreign holdings of dollars hit $50 billion by 1970, dwarfing U.S. gold at $11 billion. Germany, booming with exports, faced imported inflation from weak dollars, leading to mark revaluations in 1961 and 1969. Japan, the economic miracle, amassed dollars, reluctant to revalue the yen. Dramatic anecdote. French warships docked in New York in 1968, loading $400 million in gold bars, a symbolic slap at U.S. hegemony. De Gaulle's advisor, Jacques Rueff, warned of deficit without tears. By 1970, U.S. gold coverage dropped to 55%, below the 100% needed. Speculators, smelling blood, drove Eurodollar markets wild. Nixon's team, Connally, a Texas cowboy type, quipped, "Foreigners are out to screw us," pushed for action. In May 1971, West Germany floated the mark, abandoning Bretton Woods pegs, triggering a dollar sell-off. Switzerland and Netherlands followed. Gold prices whispered above $35 unofficially. Inflation hit 4.4%, unemployment 6%, stagflation coined. Congress grumbled with protectionist bills like Mills-Vanik. A secret memo from Volcker outlined closing the gold window as a contingency. As summer heated up, Britain quietly requested $3 billion gold cover, panicking the White House. This cascade of events, from war costs to European pushback, cornered Nixon, leading to that fateful Camp David weekend where the shock was born. The cracks weren't just fissures, they were chasms swallowing the old order. With the system's fractures widening, the breaking point arrived in the scorching summer of 1971, forcing Nixon's hand in a whirlwind of crisis and secrecy. By July, the dollar was under siege. European central banks bought $5 billion in days to prop it up, but faith eroded. Inflation raged at 4.4%, unemployment at 5.9%, and the trade deficit turned negative for the first time since 1893, a humiliating $2 billion hole. Gold reserves teetered at $10 billion, barely covering liabilities. Eye-popping fact, on August 13th, Britain demanded conversion of $750 million into gold, but whispers said it was $3 billion, enough to drain U.S. stocks. This London gold rush scare was the tipping point. Nixon, vacationing in California, scrambled his team. On Friday the 13th, ominous date, he choppered to Camp David with Connally, Burns, Volcker, Schultz, and others, in total blackout. No calls out, staff sworn to secrecy. Over steak dinners and golf cart rides, they debated for 20 hours. Burns wanted gradual fixes, but Connally pushed shock and awe. Close the gold window, freeze wages, slap import tariffs. Nixon, no economist, he once joked, "I don't know a damn thing about economics. leaned on politics, eyeing 1972 polls showing economy as top voter worry. Anecdote: Volcker, chain-smoking, drafted the plan on yellow legal pads, warning of global turmoil but necessity. Connolly's bravado won. We'll take our chances. By Sunday, the package was set. End gold convertibility. 90-day wage price freeze, first peacetime ever. 10% import surcharge to bully revaluations. Nixon timed the TV address for 9 p.m. Eastern Time, bumping Bonanza, ensuring maximum audience. In a 15-minute speech, he sold it as bold leadership for prosperity without war, blaming international money speculators. Behind the curtain, it was a default on gold promises, but framed patriotically. Markets closed. Monday for cooling off. This high-stakes drama, like a thriller novel, culminated the decade's woes, birthing the shock that redefined money. As the world awoke to the news, reactions poured in, setting off a chain of global reckonings we'll explore next. The shockwave from Nixon's announcement rippled instantly, as the world grappled with the audacious move that ended an era overnight. On August 16, 1971, stock markets reopened with a bang. The Dow jumped 33 points, its biggest gain ever, as investors bet on a stronger US economy. But abroad, fury erupted. Japanese PM Eisaku Sato called it a bolt from the blue. Their stock market plunged 20% in days. European leaders accused America of economic warfare. West Germany's Helmut Schmidt fumed over the unilateral dictate. Eye-catching story. In Paris, officials toasted with champagne, seeing it as vindication of de Gaulle's warnings, but worried about chaos. The import surcharge hit hard, 10% on half of US imports, exempting raw materials, designed as leverage. Canada, a top trader, threatened retaliation. The wage freeze stunned unions. AFL-CIO's George Meany blasted it as Robin Hood in reverse. Yet public approval soared to 56%, with letters praising Nixon's guts. Gold prices spiked to $43 immediately, signaling the end. In Washington, celebrations. Connolly strutted, saying, "We gave him the works." But the real game was negotiation. By September, the group of 10 ministers met in London, US demanding 10 to 15% revaluations. Japan resisted, but the yen floated up 7%. Anecdote: Nixon taped conversations reveal glee. "We stuck it to him good." The Smithsonian Agreement, in December, at the Smithsonian Institution revalued currencies. Yen up 17%, mark 13.5%. Dollar devalued 8.5% versus gold to $38 per ounce. The surcharge lifted, but convertibility stayed suspended. This tunnel of exchange rates lasted till 1973, when full floating began. The shock wasn't just policy, it was psychological warfare, proving US dominance. As immediate fires were doused, the long-term flames ignited, reshaping economies in ways no one fully anticipated. Following the initial blast, the immediate aftermath saw a mix of relief and turmoil as the world adjusted to a gold-free dollar, with markets and governments scrambling to find new footing in this uncharted territory. Inflation dipped temporarily from the price freeze, dropping to 2.9% by year-end, boosting Nixon's popularity as Americans felt a brief sense of control over rising costs. But the freeze created underground economies. Stories emerged of shop owners creatively adjusting inventories to skirt rules, and businesses finding loopholes in wage controls, highlighting the challenges of sudden policy shifts. Globally, currencies floated wildly at first. The dollar depreciated about 10% against major counterparts like the mark and yen, which in turn helped US exports surge by over 20% in 1972. Revitalizing industries from manufacturing to agriculture. Eye-opener. Gold, now unbound from official prices, climbed steadily to $60 per ounce by early 1972, enriching forward-thinking investors who had positioned themselves early, including prominent figures in finance who saw the shift coming. This newfound freedom for gold trading sparked a wave of interest in precious metals as safe havens, with banks and individuals alike stockpiling bars and coins in secure vaults. OPEC nations, sensing a shift in global power dynamics, began subtle discussions on oil pricing strategies that would later culminate in major adjustments, foreshadowing the energy crises ahead. In the US, the shock not only aided Nixon's landslide re-election by portraying him as a decisive leader, but also distracted from emerging political scandals that would unfold in the coming years. Anecdote: Paul Volcker, reflecting later on his role, described it as the most significant financial event of the post-war era, emphasizing how it forced a re-evaluation of international trust in currencies. European countries, feeling the pinch, accelerated plans for greater economic integration, laying groundwork for what would become the European monetary system and eventually the euro. Japan, adapting quickly, pivoted even more aggressively toward export-led growth models, fostering the rise of conglomerates and technological innovation that defined Japan Inc. as a global force. The International Monetary Fund had to adapt too, expanding the role of special drawing rights as an alternative reserve asset to fill the void left by gold-backed dollars. But early signs of trouble appeared. As Phase 2 of the controls kicked in during November, easing the strict freezes into guided increases, inflation began to creep back up, hinting that the measures were more bandage than cure. Labor unions organized protests, demanding fairer adjustments, while small businesses lobbied for exemptions, creating a patchwork of compliance across the nation. Historians note that this period marked the beginning of a more interventionist government role in everyday economics, influencing policies for decades. The shock's success was indeed short-lived, as underlying pressures like commodity price rises and supply chain disruptions started to build, leading directly into the volatile economic landscape of the 1970s that we'll delve deeper into next. This transition from fixed to flexible systems wasn't seamless. It required recalibrating everything from trade agreements to personal saving strategies, forever altering how nations interacted financially. As the dust settled from the immediate reactions, the long-term aftermath ushered in the full fiat era, with the 1970s emerging as a decade of profound economic upheaval and adaptation that tested the resilience of global systems. Without the anchoring discipline of gold convertibility, central banks around the world gained unprecedented freedom to expand money supplies, which fueled what became known as the Great Inflation, with US rates peaking at an astonishing 13.5% by 1980, eroding purchasing power and savings for millions. This era saw everyday items like groceries and fuel double or triple in price, prompting families to adjust budgets and lifestyles in ways that echoed the hardships of earlier depressions, but with a modern twist. Oil shocks, particularly the 1973 embargo by OPEC in response to geopolitical tensions, quadrupled crude prices overnight, exacerbating stagflation, a toxic mix of stagnant growth and soaring costs that baffled economists trained in traditional models. Eye-catching detail: gold's value skyrocketed to $850 per ounce by 1980, representing a staggering 2,400% increase from pre-shock levels, turning it into a symbol of financial independence and attracting a new generation of investors to commodities markets. The dollar, despite initial weaknesses, maintained its dominance through innovative arrangements like the petrodollar system, where Saudi Arabia and other producers agreed to price oil exclusively in US currency, recycling vast revenues back into American bonds and securities, bolstering the economy. Anecdote: Paul Volcker's bold move as Fed chair in 1979, hiking interest rates to 20%, finally tamed the inflation beast, but at the cost of a severe recession, with unemployment spiking and businesses closing, demonstrating the painful trade-offs of fiat flexibility. Globally, the shift to floating exchange rates introduced greater volatility, but also allowed countries more agility in responding to domestic needs, such as devaluing to boost competitiveness or appreciating to curb imports. Developing nations faced mixed fortunes. Some benefited from cheaper dollars for debt servicing, while others struggled with imported inflation from commodity booms. The shock enabled governments to run massive deficits without the immediate constraint of gold outflows, funding expansive social programs, infrastructure projects, and even international aid initiatives that shaped global development. In Europe, it accelerated monetary cooperation, leading to the Snake Agreement in 1972, an eventual path to the Eurozone. Japan and Germany emerged stronger, investing in efficiency and innovation, while the US focused on deregulation to spur growth. However, this new freedom also sowed seeds for future crises, like the Latin American debt defaults in the 1980s, as easy money led to overborrowing. Environmental and energy policies evolved too, with nations seeking alternatives to oil dependency. As we connect these threads to the present day, it's clear that the 1971 decision's ripples continue to influence everything from central bank strategies to individual investment choices, creating a world where money is more tool than treasure. Today, the echoes of the 1971 decision are woven into every aspect of modern finance, shaping both the advantages and pitfalls of our fiat-based systems in ways that affect daily life and global strategies. Fiat currency's flexibility has enabled rapid responses to crises, such as the massive stimulus packages during the 2008 financial meltdown and the trillions injected during the COVID-19 pandemic, helping economies rebound faster than under rigid gold constraints. However, this ease of printing has ballooned national debts to unprecedented levels, the US alone surpassing $34 trillion, raising concerns about sustainability and future generations' burdens. Inequality has widened dramatically, as asset bubbles in stocks, real estate, and other investments disproportionately benefit the wealthy, while wage earners face eroding purchasing power from persistent low-level inflation. Eye-opener. The birth of Bitcoin in 2009, positioned as digital gold, was a direct backlash against fiat vulnerabilities, inspiring a cryptocurrency revolution valued in trillions today, with millions turning to decentralized alternatives for financial sovereignty. Central banks worldwide still hold over 35,000 tons of gold as a hedge against uncertainty, blending old world security with new monetary tools. Anecdote: emerging economies in the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively discussing gold-backed trade mechanisms or new reserve currencies to reduce dollar dependency, reflecting ongoing shifts in global power. The decision taught a core lesson. Money's value stems from collective trust rather than physical backing. But when that trust erodes through overprinting or policy missteps, it can lead to hyperinflation scenarios seen in places like Zimbabwe or Venezuela. In everyday terms, it influences everything from mortgage rates to retirement planning, with apps and fintech innovations, making finance more accessible yet volatile. Environmental impacts are notable too, as fiat enables funding for green transitions, but also sustains resource-intensive growth. Looking ahead, debates rage on potential returns to hybrid standards, like incorporating digital assets or commodities into reserves, to blend stability with innovation. Policymakers grapple with balancing growth and control, drawing from 1971's legacy to navigate challenges like owl-driven economies or climate-related disruptions. This evolution underscores how one pivotal choice continues to redefine wealth creation, international relations, and personal financial security in our interconnected world. In conclusion, the 1971 decision stands as a monumental pivot in monetary history, not merely a policy adjustment, but a transformative shift that redefined the essence of wealth, governance, and future economic possibilities for generations. From the disciplined era of gold-backed stability to the dynamic realm of fiat flexibility, it unleashed waves of innovation, allowing for expansive growth and crisis management, but also introducing risks of instability that demand vigilant oversight. Key lessons endure. Fiscal discipline remains crucial, or unchecked inflation can erode societal foundations, as seen in historical and modern examples. Eye-catching reflection. Imagine an alternate timeline where Nixon maintained the gold link, perhaps slower global growth but fewer debt crises, and no explosive rise of cryptocurrencies as counterforces. This event empowered central banks to act as economic stewards, influencing everything from trade balances to technological advancements, while highlighting the interplay between politics and finance. As viewers, consider how this directly impacts your savings, investments, and even daily transactions in a world of digital wallets and borderless commerce. The legacy prompts ongoing discussions on reforming systems for equity and sustainability, with experts advocating blends of traditional and emerging assets. Thanks for joining this exploratory journey through hidden financial history. If this video helped you, make sure to like it. It really supports the channel. Subscribe for more videos like this and share it with someone who'd benefit. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.